So when you start to think about, let's say, some of these things that you've invested in, how much of the investment is based on the idea? How much of it's based on the technology? And then how much of it is still based on kind of the founders or the people? And the reason why I think that that's interesting is if you were to go talk to kind of traditional early stage venture capitalists, they would say it's people, it's people, it's people. And then it's market. How big is the market? How important is the market? Why now? All that type of stuff. Is it the same evaluation framework kind of in this digital space, or are there different kind of order of operations or importance and prioritization that you put on the various elements of underwriting a deal?
So when we first entered in the space, and just to be really clear, we're not a venture capitalist in a typical sense, right? We don't have a fund. So everything we invest out of is out of our balance sheet. So we don't have sort of the typical sort of VC LP structure. We're an operating company. And I think this sort of maybe changes the lens of how we look at investing. So I can certainly understand that if you're a VC, you need to look at the outcome. You might have a 7-year horizon. So you need to look at the exit. So timing matters perhaps a lot more for a company like that, because a VC has to think about the right timing. If they sort of are a little bit too early, those extra few years in where nothing happens may become quite deadly for the returns of the fund, for instance, right? But for us as an operating company, which I also think is really the model that I think more companies are going to sort of do, not just in our space, but in general, where they have to invest, for relationships, for innovation, and for ideas, which is really sort of where we came from. We wanted to help seed the NFT ecosystem because we wanted to build in that space, but we couldn't do everything ourselves. It was impossible to. If you're building in an open ecosystem, then you can't sort of try to control everything. That's not possible. So how do we help make it grow? We have to invest. And so we made these ecosystem checks, and invested in companies like OpenSea and Wax and Decentraland. And yes, of course, it was people, but really the people in and of itself comes from their sort of mission and purpose and the belief of what was going to happen. You have to sort of remember that in 2018, generally speaking, most people were running away from, fungible tokens already because the market was so poor at the time. Bitcoin was like hovering around $3,000. I think ETH at one point went below 100, like really sort of, dark days. And then here we are talking about a non-fungible, less tradable, less liquid version of a sort of kind of cryptographic token. And everyone's like, what are you talking to me about? So the investing here had nothing to do about sort of the classic elements of timing, for instance. When do you time it? Is the market right? One could easily argue that in 2018 and 2019, the market wasn't right. This wasn't about that. This was about making a market. This was about helping create and form a kind of future that we thought could be possible. It was sort of a different lens. And so the founders who were already building in that period of time were similar in their belief, right? It was, sort of a band of, really just a few hundred of us, if you think about it, who sort of had a real strong passion in doing this, because it wasn't for the money, because there wasn't any money to be made in 2018 and 2019, certainly in that space. But technology is one where you want to know that they have the capacity to build it. But certainly with early technologies like this, it's not the be all end all, because things will evolve. So I think really it is more in our case where we look at the people, but in this case also at the ethos and the mindset of the people. In terms of really trying to create sort of digital property rights as a reality, and a belief that sort of open systems like this is the most important thing here that we're trying to build in an open metaverse.
And when you start to think about some of these products, teams, and kind of opportunities, is there anything related to geography? Like, is most of this in Asia? Do you see most of it in the Western world? How do you think about geography as part of the investments?
One of the fascinating things about this opportunity here is that it's really opened up opportunities from an investing in a global perspective. It used to be that VCs would, and we had the same problem when we were looking to raise money. In fact, Animoca Brands had quite a bit of difficulty raising money from traditional VCs. In fact, we didn't raise any money from traditional VCs in the earliest formations of our business because we were actually based in Hong Kong, and for the classic rule of thumb was, well, if I can't see you or travel to you or visit you on a regular basis, then that doesn't make sense for us to invest, right? Which is sort of the rule of thumb back then. Today, that's partially because of COVID, that's all thrown out the window. And the opportunity, of course, has been that people are now able to invest regardless of whether you're VC in Europe or in US in companies that exist in Vietnam or in the Philippines or, in Indonesia, for instance. And these were typically places that would have been ignored in the past, which means that you can now tap into a global talent pool in a much more sort of available manner than before. So, talent is generally quite global, but, capital itself hasn't been quite as global. In fact, people used to move to Silicon Valley so that it can tap into the Silicon Valley money. That is no longer true, which is, I think, actually for the better, because it also means that it becomes more competitive as well in terms of opportunities and deals. And actually, there's more opportunity for the companies that exist in places like Vietnam, which today has become an incredible sort of crypto hotspot, particularly when it comes to blockchain gaming, or even in the Philippines, right? Which were typically great sort of test beds for innovation, but very, very rarely would they ever attract international venture capital.
When you start to think about kind of the types of companies, there's this huge focus now on Metaverse. And obviously, Facebook changed their entire company name to Meta. And I've seen people debate, what is the Metaverse? How do you describe that? How do you define it? Is it a place? Is it a point in time? Is it a thing? Like what the hell is the Metaverse?
So the way that we think of the Metaverse is a place in which we actually own our digital assets, in which we can actually have true digital property rights. Now, let me just go back a little bit here, in the sense that I think that in the last 30 to 40 years, we have been prepared for this moment, in a sense that we have been trained to be sort of, virtual beings, as it were. With the earliest days of, pre-internet services like CompuServe, we had these small fledgling communities, which was actually my first online experience was on CompuServe. And then eventually with the beginning of the early forms of internet, and then eventually to Mosaic and then Netscape browsers. And then, of course, you had AOL and all that stuff. As time went on, we went from sort of small digital virtual sort of existences to where we are today, where there's, close to 5 billion people online, for instance, that have really become digital dependents, who do everything online right now. I mean, if you think about sort of what is the first thing you do in the morning? What do you do most of the day? How do you end your day? Likely, you're probably doing something on a digital device, which means that you're already connected in a kind of pre-metaverse experience, right? And so now, however, the problem with what people are trying to define the metaverse from our perspective is to say, oh, isn't the metaverse just a more immersive version of the way we're already sort of tapping into the digital worlds today? We would generally disagree with that. It's not VR and AR from our perspective, or any sort of tools. These are ways in which you can experience the metaverse, but that is not the metaverse itself. The way we define the metaverse is one where there's true digital property rights in which you can have a stake and an ownership in. It matters more when you actually own a piece of that. And, because of blockchain, you can actually now truly own, your virtual estate, as it were. And, the metaverse becomes real to us because it has real economic benefits. It has real sort of real effects in our actual life, as opposed to playing a game, which is entertainment. It's fun. So we liken the example of, those type of environments where, that could be very fun, kind of like going to Disneyland. It's like a tourist experience. It's nice, but we don't own a piece of that, and therefore it has no impact, and that's not the metaverse. But the metaverse is the place where it has an actual meaning to us, and it can only happen when we actually have ownership in it.